2:47 a.m., the kind of time no parent ever wants to remember. In a sterile NICU room, the flatline was more deafening than any alarm could ever be. Doctors stood with faces they wished they'd never have to show. A mother, pale and trembling, clutched her tiny son, so small he fit in the palm of her hand, whispering his name like a prayer she hoped would break the silence. The father, successful, proud, usually in control of every boardroom and business deal he ever touched, was frozen, powerless. And then the doctor spoke the words every family fears: time of death. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happens next challenged everything these doctors believed. This is the story of Lucas and Emma Harper, an ordinary couple whose lives were about to be changed forever. Earlier that night, Emma had gone into early labor weeks before her due date. Their son, little Noah, arrived far too soon. Smaller than any parent should have to see, weighed with tubes and monitors keeping track of every breath he fought for. The NICU team worked desperately, but at 2:47 a.m., Noah's tiny heart stopped. In that moment, the room felt frozen in time, as if even the air held its breath. The nurse quietly stepped back, eyes moist, while Emma's whisper turned into a shuddering sigh. Every expectation of first smiles, first words, first steps vanished in a single moment. They were told he was gone. And then a voice came from the doorway, one that didn't belong in that room. It was Nurse Harper. No relation, just a coincidence of name, but she had been pulled back into the hall by another call. Something made her turn around. Something made her walk slowly toward the room where a lifeless baby lay under sheets and tubes. She stepped inside and stopped. Stopped because she saw a flicker, just a flicker, on those monitors. A heartbeat. The doctors, exhausted from hours of grueling shifts, didn't understand how it was possible. They had confirmed the flatline, they had marked the time, they had already begun conversations that come after loss. But the monitor now registered a beat, weak, uncertain, but unmistakably life. Can you imagine being in their shoes? Thinking it's over and suddenly facing the impossible? Tell us in the comments how you think you'd react if this happened to your own child. The tension in the room surged. Machines that moments ago had been silent now beeped with fragile rhythm. The doctors rallied around, breath held, hands steadying. In that stunned silence, Emma opened her eyes, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Hope fighting fear in every pulse of her heart. What happened next would redefine what this family believed about loss, love, and the very strength of the human spirit. Stay with us, because your understanding of hope is about to deepen in ways you never expected. To understand why this moment mattered so deeply, you have to understand the people standing in that room. Daniel Harper was a self-made millionaire, the kind of man who built his life on early mornings, late nights, and an unshakable belief that effort always led to results. He grew up with very little, learned early that control was survival, and carried that mindset into adulthood. If there was a problem, he solved it. If there was a delay, he paid to remove it. That philosophy had worked for everything: business, reputation, comfort, until now. Standing beside the NICU bed, Daniel felt something unfamiliar pressing against his chest. Helplessness. No negotiation, no influence, no donation could change what the doctors had just said. Have you ever experienced a moment where everything you relied on suddenly meant nothing? Where all your achievements couldn't protect the one thing you loved most? Emma Harper was different. Before becoming a mother, she had been a nurse. Years spent in hospital corridors taught her to read the subtle language of the body. She noticed changes others dismissed. She trusted instincts shaped by long nights beside fragile patients. During the pregnancy, she felt something wasn't right. The nausea that lingered too long. The swelling that didn't fully go down. The quiet fear she carried but struggled to put into words. Daniel reassured her, gently but firmly, that they had access to the best care money could provide. Private appointments, renowned specialists, cutting-edge technology. Emma wanted to believe that too. Still, she prayed in small, quiet moments, not out of fear exactly, but out of awareness, because she knew that life doesn't always follow plans, even well-funded ones. If you were in her place, would you trust your instincts, or would you silence them for peace of mind? The pregnancy had been labeled high risk early on. Doctors monitored closely, adjusting medications, scheduling frequent scans. Every complication came with reassurance. Every concern came with a solution. When Emma asked if they should slow down, rest more, prepare for an early delivery, she was told things were under control. And for a while it seemed true, until it wasn't. Now those same doctors, the best in the city, surrounded by machines designed to measure life down to the smallest detail, stood in quiet disbelief. Technology could track heartbeats, regulate breathing, sustain fragile bodies, but it couldn't promise outcomes. In that moment, wealth and training met the same limit. A tiny child lay between them, reminding everyone in the room that some things remain beyond reach. How does it feel to realize that no amount of preparation guarantees safety? Daniel looked around the room, at the monitors, the staff, the woman he loved holding their son, and felt something crack inside him. With all the money in the world, this was the first thing he couldn't buy. No shortcut, no leverage, no second chance he could negotiate into existence. And as that realization settled, another question quietly formed. One he would carry long after this night ended. If control could disappear so completely in a single moment, what truly mattered when everything else fell away? Hold on to that thought, because what happened next would force every person in that room to confront an answer they weren't prepared for, and maybe it will make you reflect on what you hold closest to. While doctors hovered over machines and parents held their breath inside that hospital, something else was happening just beyond the glass doors. Outside, the rain fell steadily, tapping against concrete and pooling beneath flickering security lights. Under a narrow awning near the ambulance bay, a barefoot teenage boy lay curled on a piece of cardboard, his hoodie pulled tight against the cold. Most people walked past him without a second glance. Some didn't see him at all. His name was Eli. Just Eli. He wasn't a patient. He wasn't visiting anyone. And he wasn't allowed inside. Security had already warned him more than once to move along. But each night, he returned. Same place. Same corner. Same quiet presence. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to overlook someone when you're focused on your own emergency? Eli had been sleeping outside that hospital for weeks. Not because he wanted attention, and not because he expected help. It was simply where he ended up. He watched the automatic doors open and close, watched families rush in with hope still clinging to their faces, and others walk out carrying grief they couldn't yet name. Ambulances arrived with urgency, red lights cutting through the rain, then disappeared back into the night. Eli learned the rhythm of the place, the sound of stretchers rolling over tile, the way nurses leaned forward when something wasn't right. He noticed details most people never think about. And sometimes, when the night grew especially quiet, he whispered prayers. Not the kind meant to be heard, just soft words under his breath, like reminders to himself that life still mattered. Do you believe quiet prayers count as much as loud ones? No one asked him why he stayed there, and he didn't offer an explanation. He kept his head down, avoided eye contact, and followed the unspoken rules of staying invisible. When the rain came, he shifted closer to the wall. When the cold crept in, he tucked his feet beneath him. Hospital staff passed by during smoke breaks, eyes tired, minds elsewhere. Some noticed him and felt a momentary pull of concern. Others hardened themselves, telling their hearts they couldn't carry one more burden. Eli didn't blame them. He understood exhaustion. He understood limits. Still, every night, he watched the building as if something inside it mattered to him personally, even though no one inside knew his name. Have you ever felt connected to a place or a moment without knowing why? That night felt different to him. He couldn't explain it, and he wouldn't have tried. As the rain slowed to a mist, Eli sat up, resting his back against the cold concrete. He listened, not just to sounds, but to something deeper. The hospital lights flickered slightly as a generator tested itself. An ambulance arrived faster than usual. Nurses moved with sharper urgency. Eli pressed his palms together briefly, bowing his head. His lips moved, barely forming words. He didn't ask for anything specific. He never did. He just asked for strength, for mercy, for life to be gentler than it often was. Inside, at that exact moment, a mother held a child she believed she had lost. Outside, a boy no one noticed felt a weight settle in his chest. If you were there, would you have sensed it too? Eli stood, stepping carefully to avoid the puddles, and moved closer to the entrance than he usually dared. The glass doors reflected his thin frame back at him, a reminder of how little space he took up in the world. He knew he wasn't supposed to be there. He knew security might tell him to leave again. Still, something kept him rooted in place. His whisper turned into a single sentence, spoken so quietly it was almost lost to the rain. No drama, no expectation, just sincerity. And as he lowered his head once more, unaware of the chaos unfolding a few floors above him, one thought crossed his mind with unusual clarity. Tonight something was wrong, and without knowing how or why, he felt that he was meant to be close when it happened. How often do moments that change everything begin with someone the world barely sees? Inside the NICU, the atmosphere shifted from disbelief to procedure. Doctors moved with careful efficiency, voices lowered, hands steady as they began what came after hope had supposedly ended. Monitors were adjusted. Notes were recorded. Timelines confirmed. A nurse reached gently toward Emma, explaining what needed to happen next, using words learned from years of training, words meant to soften something that could never truly be softened. Emma didn't respond. Her arms tightened instinctively around Noah's still body, as if letting go would make the loss final. Her cheek rested against his blanket, breathing him in, memorizing a scent she feared would fade too quickly. Daniel stood nearby, jaw clenched, eyes darting from face to face, waiting for someone, anyone, to offer certainty. None came, only rehearsed compassion and clinical calm. And in that calm, something inside him broke. Daniel demanded explanations that had no answers. How could a heart stop and then start again? How could the best equipment in the country miss something so critical? The doctors listened, nodding, acknowledging his frustration, but they couldn't give him what he wanted. Medicine had limits. They said it gently but firmly. One physician suggested it was time to let the nurses prepare Noah for transfer. Emma shook her head, barely perceptible, but enough. No, she whispered. Not yet. Not now. Her voice trembled, but her grip did not loosen. The room filled with tension, the kind that makes every second stretch longer than it should. Authority met grief. Protocol met love. And no one knew which should give way. Have you ever been told to accept something your heart simply refused to understand? That was when the door opened. Not quietly, not dramatically, just enough to pull every eye in the room away from the bed. A security guard stood at the entrance, uncomfortable, clearly out of place. Beside him was the boy from outside. Wet hoodie, bare feet, eyes wide, but steady. He didn't belong there, and everyone could see it. The room reacted instantly. A doctor spoke first, voice sharp with surprise. He can't be in here. Another followed, pointing to the equipment. This is a sterile environment. The guard hesitated, explaining that the boy had refused to leave, that he kept saying it was important. Emma looked up, confusion crossing her face. Daniel turned, anger flashing briefly before exhaustion took over. In a room built on control and rules, this interruption felt almost offensive. Why now? Why him? The boy didn't move forward. He didn't argue. He didn't look around at the machines or the doctors or the man in the expensive suit. His eyes went straight to the baby. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence returned, thick and heavy, pressing against every wall. A nurse stepped closer to Emma, whispering again, "Ma'am, please step aside." Emma didn't answer. Her gaze shifted from her son to the boy and back again, something unreadable flickering across her face. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but stopped. There was something about the boy's stillness that made words feel unnecessary. The security guard cleared his throat, unsure of what to do next. Time felt suspended, as if the room itself was waiting. And then the boy finally spoke. His voice was quiet, respectful, barely louder than the machines around them. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain why he was there. He didn't raise his voice or ask for permission twice. He said only 5 words, each one landing with unexpected weight. "May I touch the baby?" The room froze. Every rule, every title, every assumption collided in that instant. No one answered him right away. And just before anyone could, just before the tension broke one way or another, the moment cut sharply, leaving one question hanging in the air. What happens when interruption meets desperation, and neither is willing to step aside? To understand why the boy asked that question, you have to understand where belief came from for him. Eli grew up moving from place to place, learning early that nothing stayed permanent for long. Foster homes with different rules, different tempers, different levels of kindness. Some homes meant quiet dinners and curfews. Others meant learning how to stay out of the way. When placements ran out, there were nights spent on church basement floors, thin mats laid out in rows, the air smelling faintly of cleaning supplies and old hymn books. Hunger wasn't dramatic for him. It was constant. The kind that teaches you how to eat slowly and save half for later. In those places, faith wasn't taught with certainty. It was offered like a suggestion, something to hold onto when there was nothing else. Have you ever believed in something not because it promised results, but because it gave you direction? Eli learned to pray young, mostly because it was the only thing adults couldn't take away from him. He prayed quietly, often alone, never expecting miracles. There was a time, years earlier, when he had prayed harder than ever before, for his younger sister, Lily. She had been smaller than him, always clinging to his sleeve, always trusting him to know what to do. When she got sick, he prayed every night beside her borrowed bed, asking only that she wouldn't be afraid. She didn't get better. The prayer didn't change the ending. And when she was gone, something important settled inside him. He didn't stop believing, but he stopped expecting outcomes. He realized prayers weren't bargains. They were acts of obedience, a way of showing up, even when the answer was silence. How do you keep faith when experience teaches you that love doesn't guarantee rescue? After that loss, Eli never prayed for things to turn out a certain way again. He prayed to do what felt right when the moment came. He prayed to listen, to notice, to respond when something inside him stirred. Hunger, cold, rejection, those things shaped him, but they didn't harden him. They sharpened his awareness. He learned how pain sounded in a room, how fear moved through people even when they tried to hide it. Standing outside the hospital night after night, he wasn't hoping for reward or recognition. He wasn't waiting for someone to notice him. He was simply being where he felt he was meant to be. Watching, listening, ready. If you've ever felt a pull you couldn't explain, would you trust it enough to act on it? So when something felt wrong that night, Eli didn't question it. He didn't weigh consequences or imagine how he might look walking into a place where he clearly didn't belong. He didn't believe obedience meant success. He believed it meant faithfulness, even if it led to embarrassment, even if it ended in being escorted back outside, even if nothing changed at all. The memory of unanswered prayers didn't stop him. It guided him. It reminded him that doing the right thing was never about control. It was about courage. And as he stood there, soaked from the rain, heart steady despite the fear pressing in, he wasn't thinking about miracles. He was thinking about responsibility, about listening when something asks you to move. So why would he risk humiliation now? Why step into a room full of authority, grief, and rules designed to keep people like him out? Because once before, he had stayed quiet when someone needed him. And this time, whatever the outcome, he refused to walk away again. The question wasn't whether his action would change anything. The question was whether he could live with himself if he did nothing. And that question, more than belief, more than fear, more than hope, was what carried him forward toward a moment that would change everything. Back in the NICU, everything slowed. The machines that had dictated urgency moments earlier were quiet now. Their screens dimmed, their purpose paused. No alarms, no instructions, just the low hum of electricity and the sound of breathing, adult breathing, uneven, restrained. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had edged closer to witness what came next. The doctors waited, bound by policy yet unsure which rule applied to moments like this. The security guard shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the floor. Time stretched thin, elastic, each second pulling longer than the last. Emma looked down at her son again, memorizing the shape of his nose, the faint crease in his eyelids. Daniel's voice finally broke the silence, firm but shaken. This had gone far enough. He said no. He said it out of fear, not anger. Fear of false hope. Fear of another goodbye. Have you ever said no to protect yourself from believing again? Emma didn't answer him right away. She noticed something instead. Something small, easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Her thumb brushed against Noah's hand, and she paused. His fingers were still warm. Not warm like a memory, but warm like now. Her breath caught, and she checked again. Slower this time, as if the moment might shatter if she moved too fast. The room waited. Emma lifted her head and looked at Daniel, her eyes steady in a way they hadn't been all night. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply said, "Just 1 minute." Not a plea, not a challenge. A request grounded in a mother's knowing. Daniel hesitated, torn between logic and the quiet authority of the woman who had carried their child. How do you choose when certainty and instinct collide? The doctors exchanged looks again, the same looks from earlier, but different now. less final, more uncertain. 1 minute felt harmless. 1 minute wouldn't undo anything, they told themselves. And yet everyone understood that something about this minute mattered. Emma shifted slightly, making space without letting go. Completely. The boy stood where he was, waiting. He didn't rush. He didn't insist. He watched Emma's face, reading her permission before anyone else's. When she nodded, barely perceptible, he took a step forward. His bare feet made no sound against the floor. His hands trembled just enough to show he understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't confidence. It was resolve. He didn't look at the father. He didn't look at the doctors. His attention stayed with the baby, as if the rest of the room had faded away and no one spoke. The silence became something physical, pressing against ears, against thoughts. The boy stopped beside the bed and hesitated, not from doubt, but from respect. He lowered his head slightly, whispering words too soft to catch, words not meant to impress or persuade. Emma watched his lips move, her own breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the room. Daniel clenched his fists, bracing himself for disappointment, for embarrassment, for regret. He wasn't sure which would come first. The minute ticked on, unnoticed by clocks, measured only by heartbeats. Outside the glass, staff paused mid-step, sensing something they couldn't name. Inside, a decision hovered in the air, fragile as glass. If this were you, would you want silence, or would you need someone to speak? The boy lifted his hand, stopping just short of contact, as if asking permission one last time without words. Emma nodded again, tears slipping free now, unrestrained. Daniel closed his eyes, unable to watch, unable to leave. The room held its breath. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden sound. No movement anyone could point to yet. Just stillness layered on stillness. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own pulse. Of time passing inside your chest. Whatever was about to happen or not happen would unfold without warning. And in that suspended moment, before anything changed, every person in that room understood they were standing at the edge of something they could never take back. It started with a sound so faint it almost went unnoticed. A flicker on the heart monitor. 1 weak blip, uncertain, like a question mark on a screen that had already been answered. A nurse leaned in, squinting, convincing herself it was interference. Then it happened again. Another blip, slightly stronger. The room snapped back to life in an instant. Doctors surged forward, hands moving on instinct, voices rising over one another as training took over. Orders were called out. Machines were reactivated. Someone reached for a stethoscope. Emma gasped, the sound tearing out of her chest as her knees gave way, tears streaming down her face before she even understood why. Daniel grabbed her just in time. His own breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Can you imagine watching hope return after you had already buried it in your heart? The monitor continued. Not steady, not strong, but alive. The room filled with motion, controlled chaos. Doctors recalculating timelines they had already closed, nurses adjusting lines, someone calling for additional support. Emma sobbed openly now, her face buried against Daniel's chest, her entire body shaking with release. Daniel stared at the screen, unable to blink, as if looking away might make it disappear. The words time of death felt distant now, unreal, spoken in another lifetime. The baby's chest moved, barely, but enough. Enough to change everything. In that moment, no one spoke about explanations. No one asked how. Survival became the only language in the room. And then, just as suddenly, something else happened. Something no one had been watching for. A soft sound came from behind them. Not a machine. Not a voice. A body hitting the floor. The boy collapsed. 1 second he was standing there, hand lowered, eyes fixed on the baby. The next, his legs gave out beneath him. A nurse turned sharply, startled, and rushed toward him. Another knelt down, checking his pulse. It was there but weak. Too weak. The room, already stretched thin between life and loss, now faced another crisis. Someone asked when he had last eaten. The answer came quietly, almost apologetically. 2 days ago. Maybe more. The boy hadn't pushed himself forward with strength. He had pushed himself forward empty. What does it mean when the one who gives everything has nothing left to give? As they laid him gently on a gurney, the truth settled in. Eli hadn't come inside fueled by certainty or confidence. He came on obedience alone. Hunger had hollowed him out, exhaustion weighed him down, And still he walked through those doors because something told him not to stay outside this time. Not again. He hadn't expected recognition. He hadn't expected success. He had only expected to act. A doctor shook his head softly, not in judgment, but in awe at the cost of what had just happened. 2 lives now balanced on the edge of human limitation, connected by a moment no one could have planned. If you were watching this unfold, who would you be worried about first, the baby who returned or the boy who fell? Emma saw him then, really saw him, not as an interruption, not as a problem, as a child, as someone else's son. Her crying shifted, something new breaking through it. Gratitude mixed with guilt, relief tangled with concern. Daniel followed her gaze, his understanding changing in real time. The room that had once measured worth in credentials and equipment now stood witness to something quieter, something humbling. The doctors worked on both patients, side by side, technology and compassion moving together without hierarchy. And in that overlap, a truth emerged that none of them would forget. The miracle didn't come from strength, came from surrender, from a boy who obeyed a pull he didn't understand, and a mother who trusted a minute that logic couldn't justify as Eli was wheeled out for care of his own. The heart monitor beside Noah continued its fragile rhythm. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but present. The room exhaled together for the first time in hours. 2 lives still uncertain. 2 futures rewritten in the same breath. And as the doctors moved forward, one question lingered, heavier than celebration, deeper than relief. What does it cost to answer a call when you have nothing left? And would you do it anyway, knowing the outcome was never promised? The baby survived. Not without struggle, not without long hours of uncertainty. But he lived. Days later, doctors would describe it carefully, choosing language that protected their training while admitting their limits. They spoke of delayed responses, rare reversals, unexplained resilience. Privately, many of them sat with something heavier. They had followed every rule, done everything right, and still stood at the edge of something they could not fully explain. Some felt humbled. Others felt uneasy. Science had carried them far, but not all the way. The monitors eventually stabilized, and Noah's breathing grew stronger, one fragile milestone at a time. Each small improvement felt earned, precious, never assumed. If you were one of those doctors, would you try to explain it away, or would you allow the mystery to remain? Daniel changed in ways that no balance sheet could record. The man who once believed control was safety found himself undone by gratitude he didn't know how to express. He cried in private at first, then without shame. He sat beside Emma for hours, holding her hand, listening more than speaking. The power he once trusted had failed him, and something quieter had carried him through. When he finally asked about the boy, when he learned where Eli had come from and where he would return to after discharge, something in him shifted permanently. This wasn't charity. This wasn't strategy. This was recognition. For the first time, Daniel understood what it meant to owe someone something that could never be repaid. Have you ever had your definition of strength completely rewritten by a single night? When Eli recovered enough to sit up, Daniel went to see him. He didn't bring lawyers or assistants. He brought an offer: housing, education, money enough to erase every hardship Eli had ever known. It was the language Daniel spoke best. Eli listened politely, eyes lowered, hands folded, and then he shook his head. He didn't refuse out of pride. He refused out of clarity. He asked only for food, a simple meal, and for prayer. Not dramatic, not public, just quiet thanks. When Daniel pressed him, confused, searching for the right words, Eli finally spoke with a calm that silenced the room. I didn't do this for him. I did it because I was asked. What do you do when someone gives you everything and wants nothing in return? That answer followed Daniel long after he left the hospital. It echoed in boardrooms and quiet moments alike. Emma carried it too, holding Noah close, whispering gratitude into his hair, knowing how close she had come to loss. The doctors returned to their work, forever altered, more careful with certainty, more respectful of moments that fall outside charts and outcomes. And Eli returned to the world he came from, changed but unchanged. He still slept lightly. He still noticed pain in rooms others passed through. He still prayed without expectation. The difference now was not recognition, it was confirmation. That listening mattered. That obedience had weight, even when the result was unknown. If no one had ever known what he did, would it still have been worth it? Life did not become perfect after that night. Noah would face challenges. Eli would face hunger again. Daniel would struggle to unlearn control. But something lasting had been planted in each of them. A reminder that value is not measured by power, that surrender can carry more force than certainty, and that sometimes the most important moments arrive through people the world barely notices. As you sit with this story, ask yourself honestly, if you felt called to act with no promise of success, no recognition, and real cost, would you step forward anyway? And if someone changed your life without asking for anything back, how would you choose to live differently because of it? Eli left the hospital the same way he had arrived, quietly, without ceremony. No cameras followed him. No one stopped him at the door. By morning, most people inside had already returned to their routines, charting vitals, changing shifts, moving on to the next emergency. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city carried on as it always did. Cars passed. People hurried to work. The world didn't pause to acknowledge what had happened inside those walls. But life did not return to what it was. Not for the parents who now understood how fragile certainty could be. Not for the doctors who had seen their authority humbled. And not for the boy who walked away unseen, carrying the weight of obedience rather than outcome. How many moments that change everything happen without applause? Noah would grow, slowly, carefully, surrounded by gratitude that never fully faded. Emma would remember the warmth in her son's fingers for the rest of her life. Daniel would measure success differently from that night forward, aware that some debts can't be cleared with money. And Eli would continue listening, because that was who he had always been. The story didn't end with answers neatly tied up. It ended with awareness, with questions that refused to stay in the hospital room, with a realization that control, faith, science, and surrender all intersect in ways we rarely understand when we need them most. If you had been there, which part of the story would have stayed with you the longest? What if miracles aren't rewards for power, but reminders that faith listens differently? What if the most important moments in our lives don't arrive through strength or certainty, but through quiet obedience, unnoticed sacrifice, and the courage to act without guarantees? Do you believe this was a miracle, or something science hasn't learned to name yet? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if stories like this move you, subscribe, we share one every week.